is my favorite bookseller. And we've been together, and we actually both live in West Seattle now. So thank you, Rick. We have many, many, many books to share, and I really appreciate you being here tonight. I also want to thank all of my students who are here tonight, and I want to recognize a few people who have been really instrumental in this book. The first is Tracy Conway, who is also known as the Almost Live World's Worst Girlfriend. For those of you. And she has edited this book many times, and she is included, she is like a sibling to me, and I included her and my brother and sister, who are both mystery buffs, as siblings, who edited this and really helped me on my first mystery book. I also really want to thank my technical assistant, Haley, who proofread it, who's a wonderful proofreader. And I want to thank Marianne Mercer, who also proofread it, and who I have mystery and tea every Tuesday afternoon with. And all of my students here, I won't ask you to show up to stand up, because it'll be the whole audience. There are a few people here who I haven't been working with as a mentor, but I also am very happy to be with Margie. We've been together for quite a long time, and I love her memoir. It's incredibly fierce and tender and beautifully written. And she has now just written her first novel, which we in our evening class are helping her with, and it's ready to be sent out. So we're going to have a long discussion about all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Margie.
Sure, with pleasure. It's so nice to see faces, actually to see human beings in the same room. If you're a writer, it's like, wow. So anyway, it's such a pleasure. Thanks to everybody to coming out tonight. I just thought this would be really fun. I have read the book, and I have tons of questions, but we'll also have Q&A after I sort of grill her a little bit, and then we can go on from there. So I wanted to start by having Brenda read the first opening scene, and after that, then I'll say more. But I think it was one of two scenes that I really loved in the book, and the other one's in the back of the book, so it would give it away, so we can't do that.
So I want to note for all of you who are writers here, that this was the last scene I wrote after 7 revisions. So don't despair if your first scene is also the last thing you ever write. Chapter 1, Eleanor Kiernan, April 29th, 2019. She'd made a mistake, escaping by boat, miscalculating tides, and foolishly braving the small craft advisory. Eleanor Kiernan gripped the outboard's tiller, sails strapped tight, navigating riptides. She'd never sailed alone without Leo at the helm. How would she ever endure this? The sight of Leonard Cushman's body splayed out, his throat slashed, his familiar green eyes holding her in his startled, accusing gaze. The boat's riggings clanked, ropes snarling around her boots like leg cuffs. Reaching into her backpack, Eleanor grabbed for the knife to cut them off. The nylon was tough as sinew, and her stiletto was still streaked with blood.
So, when I read that, I had a real reaction to it. I just thought, wow. I mean, we just dropped right in the middle of the ocean, literally, and it gives a sense, I think, of the intensity of this book that I found really goes all the way through it. And also just the complexity, actually. It's going to get a lot more complex than this, but there's several things that I want to ask her about, like weapons and various ways, choices that you make, when you're murdering somebody, and and I'm sure she'll give us some really good information about that. So my first question, though, is a little broader. I think it's on everybody's mind. I wanted to ask you, Brenda, given your track record as a writer, you know, why a mystery? Why a mystery, and why now?
So it was the pandemic. We were all in quietude. I watched a lot of BBC murder mysteries, like Killing Eve. I watched a lot of things that Acorn TV, and I thought, I can do that. You know, like in Chorus Line, I can do that. I can do those steps. But I'd never written a murder mystery, and I thought, well, I could try. Because, you know, I have done a lot of different genres, and publishers like it when you stay in a lane. Like you just keep writing the same book over and over again as if you were a rock star and you sing the same song. And I find that incredibly boring. So I thought, why don't I try beginner's mind? Try something I've never done. Plot has always been my weakness. So why not do a book that is so plot driven that I have to learn how to do it? And I would also say that I really felt that in writing a mystery, I would understand something about characters that I didn't know before. I always say to my students, character equals plot. But now I think plot can sometimes equal character. I also teach, I teach novels and nonfiction, and I wanted to be able to help my students do plot. Margie has this beautiful new novel, but when I was writing the mystery, I kept saying, all right, Margie, where's the plot? Because I was learning it so I could teach it.
It's my weakness, for sure. Yeah, so, you know, I'd love to circle back to plot in a minute, because I think there's a lot of really interesting things to talk about there. But so first, like I said before, I really want to talk weapons. So, you know, let's go there. You know, so I guess my question is, why a stiletto? It's an unusual choice, especially in this day and age, because it is a contemporary setting and story. So we're so used to guns, and maybe that's a good reason to make that choice. But you know, and I think in the book you call it the fighting knife of choice. So I'm curious about both of those things.
Well, first of all, I had the weapon before I had the title. And I didn't know the ending while I was writing the first couple drafts. So I was kind of like a reader reading my own book and trying to figure out who did it. And stiletto to me is a very elegant, feminine weapon. It's like a high heel, right? A stiletto high heel. And I will tell you that I am really afraid of knives. I grew up with guns. They don't trouble me. My whole family are hunters. So a gun just seemed the gun. But a knife, especially a stiletto that could slip in, and I did a lot of research about how it's used to kill, and it freaked me out. I had nightmares about stiletto, and I thought, well, if I'm afraid of it, maybe this will have some real impact on the reader. So that's why I chose that weapon of choice.
Well, I think I learned something new, that, you know, it is slender, but it has a diamond double-edged blade, which, you know, it's wonderful to say, but I never really realized that. Is that standard for stilettos?
Yes, and it's also been used in World War II, in D-Day. So a lot of people who are knife kind of nuts, they, or I should say aficionados about knives, they see it as this very beautiful, elegant, fighting knife. And then I thought, this should be something in the novel that is repeated, and it actually, like I said, became the first scene, because she, Eleanor Kiernan, has that stiletto. And it was, I will give you a spoiler, it was a gift to her from the man who was murdered. So, there's a spoiler.
Well, and also I was wondering how you researched things like that. You know, I know your brother, you mentioned, he's in the military.
Yes.
So did you talk with him about weapons, I would assume?
I did. My brother is the CFO of Special Forces, so he knows a lot about fighting knives and guns and bombs, etc. He's also a pilot. So when it came to a scene in the book that I'm very proud of, and I want to credit Ann Barker, who's here, and her husband Jeff, who really helped me write this very vivid scene that I loved writing. Those of you who have read it know what I'm talking about. It's kind of a penultimate scene in a plane over the Salish Sea. And I didn't know anything about small planes, and I had a lot of help with that. And then my brother, as a pilot, also read it. So Anne and Jeff read it, and my brother Dana Mark read it, and I felt that I was not on solid ground, I was midair, and I really could write that scene.
It's an amazing scene. And also, just a little, because you and I have talked a little bit about knives, and
Yes.
You told me that you were actually afraid of knives, right?
Really afraid of knives. Not that anyone's held me at knife point or anything, but I was mugged 3 times when I lived in New York City, and often there was a knife. So I actually have the experience of being someone who was attacked. But I was wearing Fry boots that had metal in them, and I kicked the shit out of one of them.
I needed boots. Well, great. So I was really amazed that running underneath the action and mystery of this book, there are several themes, and one of them that stood out to me is addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you to talk about that a little bit. Where did that come from? There's multiple kinds of addiction, so you might name them and just kind of tell us. I mean, was there a personal connection there for you, or where was that coming from?
Well, the only thing I'm addicted to is writing, but unfortunately, and I think this might be true for every one of you here, we all know someone who has suffered addiction, a family, a friend, a lover. I have 2 people in my lives, one a relative and one an old partner, who got addicted to opiates. And so during the pandemic, when we're all really dealing with amazing amounts of medical information, I thought, who would I want to kill? And it was really a fun question to ask, but kind of weird that you would be thinking and making notes in the middle of the night. Maybe I should kill a politician, maybe, Trump, or someone like that. And I thought, no, I want to kill the person who invented the opiates and got the federal approval to make them long-term and not for pain used in hospice or cancer. And so I started doing a lot of reading about Empire of Pain, which is about the Sacklers. I watched the Hulu program Dope Sick, which is all about Appalachia and how they suffered. And I thought, I'm gonna kill a CEO of Big Pharma. And even though he was, in my mind, a villain, I really felt for him on some levels, because he began as a healer and someone who wanted to use a painkiller to help, but profit got in the way. So my portrait of Leonard Cushman, the victim and the CEO of Big Pharma, is not, I hope, monochromatic.
Right. And a couple of other of those addictions that are also equally devastating, I think, to families and people around you, which, you do a beautiful job in the book of showing that. There's alcoholism, I think, there's some bulimia, that sort of thing. So how did you feel managing all of those addictions? I mean, again, your plot's very complex, which is sort of another way of asking that, is how did they arise, and then how did you just kind of, get them to interweave and, just not, I have read a lot of mysteries, but also other books that have an issue, something to grind, and then that takes over the story.
Right.
So, love to hear what you...
Well, Margie and I share a situation. Her in Hazard, she's the sister of an autistic brother who basically takes up all the oxygen in the family. And I have found that an addict in any family or structure, business, group, also takes up most of the oxygen. And so how do you deal with the people who are around addicts? Eleanor Kiernan's brother, who's her twin, has died of the same opiate that she helped to create as a biochemist. So I thought, let's focus not so much on the addicts, although there are addicts. Toni Fleischman is an addict. She's lovers with the brother Frankie, who is killed, who dies of an overdose. But one of the things that haunted me about everything I read and researched about addiction is that you never know whether it was an overdose that was accidental or it was suicide. And I had a dear friend who committed suicide, and that haunted me for many decades. And so I thought, what would it be like to have someone who you don't know whether this beloved brother of yours or friend of yours dies because they wanted basically opiate roulette. And so Margie, you felt that,
Right.
having someone take up all the air. So you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, I think with any illness, mental illness or otherwise physical illness, in a family, you can see the same pattern over and over again. So, really by necessity, a lot of the attention does have to go to that one child or that one member. And so some of it is just, you can't help it. But I think what gets lost is the other siblings, the other people in the room. I know my mother used to say, well, the two of you, my sister and I, she said, well, you were fine. You're okay. I didn't have to pay attention to that. And I think that pattern happens a lot, that somebody is growing up beside it or with it. And that is not a story that's usually clear or told, and to no fault of parents, or, you do have, it's a crisis situation that you're dealing with all the time. So I think that's the story that just needs to be told a lot more. And I think in Brenda's book with this, there's siblings involved, there's, and it's a kind of tragic pain, that you can end up with, as a sibling or somebody you love.
Yes.
Who's addicted.
I was very afraid to show this book to my siblings, my brother, my beloved brother and sister, who is a mystery buff and has a huge book club. So she's a very good reader and a pretty good editor. And I really was worried, but my brother gave me a great line from someone who he knows. And that line is in the book. And it is what Frankie tells his sister, which is, what Eleanor tells Frankie, the twin who dies. She says, be sure to put on magic marker your social security note, your social security number, so that when they find your body, they know how to recognize you. And when my brother gave me that line, I thought, oh, I'm gonna rip that right off. And you'll see it's on one of the early pages. But I also want to say that this was a blast to write. I know we're talking about very big deals like addiction and murder and opiates and everything. That is the framework. That's the plot that moves it. But what really I think is the deeper plot is what goes on between these two women. One, a detective who's coming up from cold cases on her first big high-profile case. And the other, Eleanor Kiernan, who invented these opiates, who's trying to work from within to deal with the chaos and the pain that they've caused. And that, you can see Killing Eve, you can see the BBC Killing Eve in that tension. Sometimes it's really dramatic and intense, sometimes it's playful, like siblings, sometimes there's a certain bit of eros. And I had so much fun writing in two different points of view, two very different women. And that was the fun for me, different points of view. And a certain, like for example, Eleanor really wants to dress Anna Crane, Detective Anna Crane, because Eleanor is this elegant East Coast trust fund baby, and she's a corporate person. She wants Eileen Fisher to adorn Detective Crane, who is wearing these very tidy kind of Ann Tyler, jackets and probably sensible shoes, and She looks at her, and even when in the midst of their very intense interviews, thinking, why is she wearing a ponytail? She has this beautiful, curly black hair. So I had a lot of fun with that. And I have to say, Tracy always dresses me.
What?
Tracy was a lot in that conversation, whether she knows it or not.
Well, I certainly would have dressed better if you were going to make that comment.
Well, actually, that led into my next question, which really has to do with point of view.
Okay.
So, you do have these intriguing two main characters. They're both women, which is also unusual. Scientist and detective. I mean, you've seen so many men in those positions, and if one was a male, then it would have brought on a whole nother kind of dynamic, I think, between them. So I guess my question is really, how did you come to that decision? Were they there right from the beginning, both of them?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I tried to just write a typical murder mystery with Detective Anna Crane. But in the interview process, I would slip into Eleanor's points of view, looking back at Anna Crane. And I thought, oh, I'm slipping points of view, multiple personality, I better follow this. So I did a few exercises in point of view with this other feminine voice. And she knows things that Detective Anna doesn't. And there's something that I did, we were talking about in class last night, which I want to model for all of you as writers. When the reader and the author know more about the character than the character knows herself or himself, you've created an intimacy with your reader that is beyond the plot, the action, or the character's knowledge. So you have actually created this kind of bond that's very intimate with your reader, and they love it. So I was able to do that in the book. There are times when I lift out and the reader has a better sense, and you can do that with multiple points of view. Now in Margie's novel, I want to talk about this because in the memoir, it's only first person memoir, Margie's point of view. In the beautiful novel called Broken Earth, she did it all a female point of view, but then something happened.
Yes, I was resisting. Going from memoir to fiction, wonderful stuff happens there, but I was so comfortable with first person because I'd done the memoir in first person, and so that's how I was just writing away. From it was third person, but it was one character. So it really, and I really have to do a shout out to the writers group because they kept saying, yeah, but we want to hear from Junior, who is another main character. We want to hear his point of view. And I kept saying, yeah, but he's a male, I don't know if I can do it. I really felt like, whoa, this is something I've never done before. So how do I just even start it? So I did, sort of on a whim, I decided I'd, choose one of the chapters and just do it in his point of view. So, and it took a while just to get it right, and there's so much that, of course, I had to let go of, which was the hardest part of it, I think. But once that happened, it really became clear to me that, yeah, we need to hear from him, and more than once, obviously. So, so I did. I went through, the entire table of contents that I'd already fleshed out, and I just started marking certain chapters that, probably would be easier to translate to him and more interesting. So that did end up happening, and then right at the very end, the mother came in. So I'm like, oh my God, somebody else. So, but in the end, I think what it showed me was there was such a freedom, and also it was so wonderful to have the complexity of different points of view. And I think emotionally it can go deeper in that way, or you can certainly give that complex emotional space much more latitude.
Yes.
And that was great to find out. I just think it really strengthened the book for me.
I think point of view is really the key. It's like in a film, camera angle depends on what the camera is focusing on. In point of view, if I'm in my point of view here on stage, I'm experiencing a very different event than someone like my university professor friend and student, Doug, who is writing from his very different point of view, and he's experiencing this whole event in a very different way. There might be someone in the back thinking, I'm hungry, I wonder what they have up in the cafe, you know, but point of view is really, really the key, I think, in fiction.
And I think it deepens the plot.
Yes.
It allows you to go much deeper. Otherwise, you're just kind of, you're really restricted. That's what I came to find, which is
Yes.
amazing after writing a memoir.
It's like being trapped in an elevator with someone, or on a 11-hour flight to Japan with someone who's going through a divorce. And you think, oh my God. I think I told my students this, I once on a long flight to Hawaii, a person sat down next to me who was in fact going through a divorce. And I wrote, I am a deaf mute, and handed her that. But then when the stewardess came around, I ordered something, so my jig was up. But yeah, point of view can be a trap, only if you get stuck. But I really would encourage any of you writing fiction to maybe branch out. I mean, it really deepened Margie's book, and we all love Junior. And we kept saying, Junior, what's Junior thinking? And we forbid Margie from killing the dog.
Well, I was trying to kill everybody. At one point, I'm wandering around, I've never done fiction before, and so you go down rabbit holes, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm all over the place, and I just thought, well, let's kill somebody. It sort of, brings in the tension, and pretty soon it was ridiculous. So yeah, it started with the dog for sure. So that's the first one that I had to let go of. So.
Yeah, we really forbid her from too many deaths. It was like Pac-Man. After a while, there's just too many people dying. So, yeah.
Well, and actually that brings me to dogs, because
Dogs,
we were going to
yes.
talk about our dogs. And I mean, Brody, tell us about Brody, because I think he's in the second paragraph. I mean,
He is.
There.
So when you have a character on stage who's alone, like on a boat escaping, or in a room, or in a car, it can get pretty boring if there's no conversation. Just like I like to share the stage with other writers, biologists, scientists. I don't like being on stage by myself because I bore myself. So having the dialogue, having questions from you is what excites me, and I learn. So the dog is a very good conversationalist because you can have the dog do things like almost fall overboard or save somebody. I won't give any more spoilers out, but
Right.
Mud in her book, who's this kind of hound, we care for him so much, and Mud goes through his own drama and plot, and I'm not going to say anything more. Why don't you talk about Mud?
Yeah, Mud. Oh, he was there so early on in the book. He's modeled after a dog that I did have in my younger days. I was in my early 20s, and he was just so fabulous. I mean, anybody who's had pets, you really do. You love them all, but there's one usually that stands out from all the others, and Mud is like that for me. So I found that Mud he did drive the plot. He ended up driving the plot and participating and being as much a character, and also reflecting the other people. So, they're able to read emotions and respond and behave accordingly, and it can sometimes actually give clues to the reader as to what's coming. So they're very versatile, and I found that I can't imagine taking him out. So that was lovely, and also I think they can allow you humor.
Yes.
So they're funny, I mean, animals are hilarious, and so just the way they behave in their joy you know, all of those aspects that, you know, you can pepper kind of the scene with that, especially if it's a really serious scene. You know, obviously the dog can be in tandem with that, but I know I tended to get very, you know, serious in a lot of my chapters, and the dog really helped to bring him in, and also just gives you a better insight into each of the characters, because the way they treat the animal can say a lot about who they are.
Yes.
So.
Well, I think we could open it up to questions from you all. Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask me or Margie? The deadly silence. Oh, Leslie, yes.
I was a little bit curious about the character of Leo Cushman, because you know, he seems like a very evil, or you know, in some ways evil person, and yet one of your main characters is so close to him, and that sort of feels like a little bit jarring.
Thank you for the review you wrote. I really learned something from it. Leslie is a wonderful writer. We worked on his book, Yokohama Yankee, and he's also been an editor, and we miss you in the morning class, Leslie. You know, I really didn't like Leonard Cushman when I started to create him, but I was worried that he would be a stereotype. And the more I read reportage about the Sacklers and other people who are opiate creators, the more the press seemed to create them as one-dimensional. They were just evil profiteers. And I thought, but what if someone loved him? What if he had mentored someone and given her this whole kind of raison d'etre and even taught her how to sail? And what if she was locked in some sort of endless kind of protege-mentor struggle? I've had a few of those of my own. And what if she was trying to save him from himself? That would be more interesting to me as a fiction writer who is character-driven mostly in all my other novels, than just having a stock character. And you know, a lot of the mysteries that you see on the BBC, or you know, a lot of the TV mysteries, they're really stock figures, the villains. So I don't want you to fall in love with him, but I want you to see that he took a turn away from healing toward money. And I think that that is a temptation that is very hard to resist. So I hope that answers your question. It's a good question, Leslie. Lindsay.
Well, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Anna's ability to use clairaudience in her work.
Lindsay is working on a very interesting memoir. I won't say a whole lot, except for that it has to do with other realms of knowing, other gnosis, K-N-O-S-I-S, which is other ways of experiencing and knowing things than just what you see is what you get. And so in our class we talk about that a lot. And in my family is just enough psychic to get into trouble. Meaning we can always be wrong. So as I was saying to a friend just on the way here, who was telling me about someone who was in the hospital, I said I had really bad feelings about that yesterday, but I didn't say anything. Because what I have learned with this intuitive clairsentience is what I have, which is not clairvoyance. I don't see all of your auras out there. You're just looking like normal people to me. But there are times when I know something and I don't know how I know it. I was teaching a class a while back and I turned to a student and I blurted out, "Don't worry, your husband's not going to leave you. He's just a cross-dresser." And she went, "How do you know that? Nobody knows that but me." And that was, I had not had much training in knowing when to keep my own counsel. So I have been trained and I have learned, and I don't blurt things out because I can be wrong. And I don't want to say something that would cause someone to be afraid or, you know, make a decision, and then I would be wrong. So I usually keep it to myself, unless someone asks me, and then I will tell them what I see or what I know. Now, clairaudience, you asked about, is very specific. I have some of that too. And that is, you have almost total recall of dialogue. And you can hear something. When they did my hearing test, that's really my hearing test in this book. They thought I had a brain tumor, so they were doing all sorts of hearing, brain tests. And they found that I could hear the suggestion of sound. So imagine that you drop a stone into a river. I hear the drop of the stone. Most people hear the ripples. And I still have 98% hearing. So I live in noise-canceling headphones, and I'm always running around with earmuffs because everything is very loud to me. So that's a curse and a blessing. And when I gave it to Anna, it was very useful because she could use her clairsentience to solve cold cases, and she could use her clairaudience to remember. And there's scenes that I thought, should I put this in? I mean, it's my first mystery. Everyone's gonna say, why is she writing a mystery? She doesn't know how to do it. But I thought, why don't I put something in that I understand that is kind of like Lindsay's finding in her book, asking people to go a little further than what you see is what you get. So, thank you, Lindsay.
There's a great line in the book that actually I wrote down because I loved it. And it's about Anna, and it says she has the ears of dolphins and elephants. So I loved that, and are you talking about the same that you have?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time with dolphins underwater, and they hear up to 120 hertz. The highest humans hear is 20 hertz. So when they do the test on me, I hear ultrasonic. And maybe I got it from being around dolphins so much, and listening, and I'm an audiophile. My friends and I, we'll go someplace. Tracy's very visual, Marianne's very visual, Vanessa's very visual. You see all these visual people with their, phones, and we'll walk someplace and I'll say something like, well, that was kind of a bland place, and they'll say, well, didn't you see the Picassos on the wall? Because I was looking at the water, or I was listening to the conversation. So I am not very visual. I have to work at that.
Yeah, and we had a little bit of a conversation as to, we probably all have some of these, heightened senses, but they don't get trained, they don't get used. And I know Brenda mentioned to me that she thought that I had some kinesthetic sense that was heightened, and it never dawned on me that that was the case. But it's interesting to think about because I trained as a gymnast, and of course you have to know where you are upside down and when you're blind. So a lot of that is a lot of training, and you do learn how to do it. It's not it doesn't feel like magic to you as you're doing it, but you do carry it with you.
Just 1 second. Please leave my phone. Oh,
Yeah,
she has it.
I have
Thank you. Bye, Haley. Thank you. Sorry.
But I think if any of you watched the Olympics recently, and Simone Biles had this trouble with it's called the twisties, and you don't know where you are when you're upside down. Suddenly, you don't know where you are, and it's extremely dangerous. You can kill yourself that way. So it is an extra sense that if you didn't start with it, you trained it into yourself. But there are definitely, as I remember training myself, there were people who were really natural with it, and others who really had to work hard at that. So so those senses, and how you've brought them in with a detective who, she gets a lot of resistance from everybody else because it's supposed to be just so scientific and fact-based. So that really added tension, I think, to the book.
So in Margie's work, it's very visceral. You can tell I never get a sense in her work that I am lost in time and space, and I know where my body is. A lot of the times I'll say to my students, where is your body? And they don't know because they're flashing forward, they're flashing back, and they're in they're doing all sorts of things that are complicated. and they lose track of the body. So that's something you might want to think about, what your primary sense is, and really push it in your writing, but also then develop your senses that are not as extraordinary. Okay, Kip, next.
You're so well published and you've done so many different genres, and I think of your love of animals and all of the work that you've done on their behalf. So in having written this mystery, what do you feel you most learned from it? And would you do it again?
I know this sounds strange because I've written a memoir, but I learned how to be more human in writing. I wasn't allowed, except for a dog, to have animals as my kind of vehicle or my soul. You know, I had to become more human, and it was very difficult to stay in the human realm and not, you know, go off into other realms that I always, my friends will tell me that I'm only half human. And I feel that way because of my growing up on the forest with so few people, fewer people than are in this room for the first 5 years. And I imprinted on animals. So they became my first memoir. My second memoir it was much more about religion and my family, who are, well, they're human, yes. And when I got to this, I had to limit myself only to what humans knew, except for the dog. And I think that was my biggest lesson. I thought it would be plot, and certainly I learned a lot with the plot, but I really felt for these people. Anna has a friend, a gay guy, who's named Rafe, who I fell in love with, who's always trying to take her to the magic flute and introduce her to opera, and he's a real true ally. And then, you know, I also kind of fell in love with Frankie, even though he was dead in the beginning. There were flashbacks to him, and I felt his loss as keenly, I think, as the characters did. So it was my apprenticeship to humans, and of course my next book is all about animals all the time. So I'm going back to where I'm familiar, but again, trying not to just stay in the same lane, to learn something new. I mean, why not? Why not try something brand new? And it really was fascinating to write.